So we're here to talk about a concept that will further help us understand something that I've spoken about in the past and something that many of you might have looked into yourselves. So the concept that in the past that we've spoken about is the idea of cognitive biases and how they may affect our decision-making processes as human beings, and then possibly reframing that and seeing how things that occur within osteopathic manual therapy might bias our decisions and bias the way that we view patient interactions and the way that we view the mechanisms of actual manual interventions or hands-on interventions. The concept that we want to talk about is utility. Specifically with respect to decision making, we want to talk about experienced utility. So experienced utility may also be noted as hedonic utility, and this concept, as far as I've identified it, has been spoken about by Daniel Kahneman and other research partners. Now, the concept of hedonic or experienced utility, whether it's instant, so right in a given moment, or remembered, what we're looking at is an experience that has had a positive outcome or a pleasurable outcome. So with respect to osteopathic manual therapy, if for some reason you have performed some form of hands-on work and it's produced a certain outcome the first time, well, that's a positive outcome, so that could be considered positive experienced utility or experienced utility. If you repeat that again and again, whether you have a clear-cut reason to do it or not, if you do it again and again and it provides you with a consistent positive outcome, the experienced utility grows. We contrast experienced utility with decision utility. Decision utility essentially weighs the outcomes of possible choices. So some choices will have greater statistical positive outcomes versus other choices. Now, decision utility, experienced utility doesn't necessarily have that. What experienced utility does is looks at how you essentially feel about an outcome, what that outcome does for you. So if you've consistently had a positive outcome from something, you're associatively or almost intuitively more likely to do it. If somebody tells you that placing your hands in a certain spot and moving them in a certain way is likely to create a consistent outcome, then you're more likely to be biased by that, because if you go ahead and you experience that, so you're in a room full of people and everybody has been told by an instructor that you do this, right, and you'll be able to work on the parietal bones, you'll be able to strain the sagittal suture, you'll be able to do this, you'll be able to do that. If you have an over-under hold and you have your hand under the person's sacrum, you'll be able to feel the motions of the sacrum. If somebody tells you that and then you put your hand under there in an over-under hold and you feel movement, you've already been biased as to what to expect or what to believe that is by instruction. But if you've bought into that and then you do it again and again and again, you'll perpetuate that. That's become your experienced utility. Right? The experienced utility may not necessarily be a positive outcome for the patient, but it's probably a positive outcome for you as a practitioner. And that can really kind of bungle up your thought processes, because what you'll do is you'll continue to do the same thing, and when it doesn't work, you'll say, it's the patient. Or you'll say that a patient walks in and they say specific words and you don't believe that you have the technical know-how to deal with that. Whatever it is, the idea again is that what we've created is an experience bank, a story associated with it, and then that guides what you do again and again. Now, if we recognize that what we believe about a given moment or a given intervention or a given method may not be correct, then what we can do is we can take that experienced utility and understand it as such that I can consistently and repeatedly create an outcome, whether it's more movement in a patient's shoulder, more movement in a patient's foot, whatever it happens to be, I can do that because I understand that it's experienced utility, that it's a positive outcomes, that it's based on what I've done and not what I think, right? Not necessarily an understood underlying mechanism, but I understand that my experience has taught me how to refine certain things, but then also to understand that in that refinement and in that kind of developed experience, I may be missing things, right? So if I get really good at doing something a certain way, when somebody comes in with what looks like that issue, or a shoulder issue, say I get really good at treating shoulders, somebody comes in with a shoulder issue, and for whatever reason, the refined, experienced way that I've developed to work with that doesn't work, then I'm essentially blinded by my experience. I can't see past my experience. So what we want to do is we want to understand, or what we want to take from this is to understand that just because something's worked for you a few times, worked for you for a long time, doesn't mean it's the right way. It just simply means it's the way that has worked. And it might mean that it's the way that will work again and again, but under certain circumstances, it won't work. So what we want to do is we want to build that into our general concepts and say, this works most of the time, but when it doesn't, I need to understand how to search. So we've talked about the concepts of diagnostics in the past, and essentially what we're talking about is having, as a general theme, not necessarily the individual specifics or even the concepts, but what we're talking about is having a search pattern and understanding that that search pattern may not always work, right? We have a way we search from big, small, so macro identifies micro, and having a clear algorithm. When that algorithm doesn't work, what we need to do is to understand, again, those general concepts to guide us. Build in that my algorithm is missing something and acknowledge that. And once we can do that, then we can essentially get over ourselves, get past our own minds and past our own biases. We want to understand that our biases are developed by success, right? Now, many people would say, well, it's working, so why do anything about it? What you want to understand is because it's working, you're probably going to get tripped up at some point in the future. And this just stands, this video and this chat just stands as a reminder to not get blinded by your own success.